A British soldier dies in what London calls a tragic accident on a test range in western Ukraine. In Moscow, the same event is turned into evidence that NATO is already fighting Russia, and the justification to threaten Britain directly. And on the very same day, the new NATO chief in Berlin tells Europeans to prepare for a war on the scale of our grandparents and great-grandparents. This is not just three random headlines. This is one pattern. Let's walk through it slowly. First, what we actually know. Lance Corporal George Hooley, 28 years old, paratrooper. According to the British Ministry of Defense, he was observing Ukrainians testing a new defensive capability, far from the front line, when there was an accident and he was fatally injured. No big offensive operation. No NATO brigade sneaking toward the front. A test range, a defensive system, and a fatal accident. The kind of things, sadly, that can happen on any army training area in the world. But for the Kremlin, the facts are not the point. Russian officials immediately grabbed this story. On state TV and in statements from the foreign ministry, they present it as proof that London is a direct participant in the war, that British troops in Ukraine are legitimate targets, that Russia has every right to hit them, even, they hint, outside Ukraine. So one dead soldier becomes not a tragedy, but a tool. This is how Russian propaganda works. They take something that is technically true, yes, there were British boots on Ukrainian soil, and they stretch it until it becomes something completely different. NATO invasion, Anglo-Saxon war against Russia. We are defending ourselves. It is like you are helping your neighbor fix broken lock on his door, and the drunk guy next door starts screaming that you are leading burglary ring against him. In his story, you helping the victim becomes attack on the aggressor. For Putin's system, any Western uniform in Ukraine, any advisor, any instructor, any observer is gold. They will use every such case to tell Russians at home, see, it is not us who started this. We are just resisting giant NATO machine. Now connect this with what Mark Rutte, the new NATO Secretary General, said in Berlin. He told Europeans they must be ready for conflict on a scale their grandparents would recognize. Not another small peacekeeping mission, not some limited airstrike campaign, but the possibility of a real state-to-state confrontation with Russia. There are two layers to this message. One is political. He is saying to European governments, you cannot keep cutting armies, factories, ammunition stocks, and then act surprised when the world turns dangerous. You cannot outsource your security forever to Washington and assume Americans will always be happy to pay. The other is psychological, and this one cuts deeper. For 80 years, Western Europe has lived in the longest period of great power peace in its history. No Napoleon, no Kaiser, no Hitler marching across the continent. For most Europeans under 50, war is something that happens on television, far away, to other people. But if you zoom out to the last 1,000 years, this is the weird period. The normal pattern in European history is not peace, it is insecurity. Empires rising and falling, borders moving, cities burned every few generations. Rutte is basically saying, the abnormal holiday from history is ending. And this is where the gap opens between Europeans and today's Russia. Inside Russia, the leadership and large part of society are already in war psychology. The state is mobilized, the economy is shifting into long war mode. The propaganda tells people every day, the West wants to destroy us. We are fighting for survival. Inside Europe, especially among younger generations, there is still peace psychology. Career, lifestyle, travel, Netflix, Christmas shopping. Nothing wrong with these things. This is normal life. But it means that when you suddenly say, by the way, you might need to think about blackouts, conscription, disrupted supply chains, people almost physically reject this idea. It does not fit how they imagine the world. You see it in surveys. Many say they would not fight for their country or are very reluctant. The easy conclusion is, young people today are soft. I don't buy this. In the 1930s, in Britain, there was huge pacifist movement. Big talk of never again. People signing pledges never to fight. Then, in 1939, when it became clear what Nazi Germany really was, most of that evaporated. Context changed and attitude changed. People are not born cowards or heroes. They respond to the story they believe they are inside. Right now, Europeans do not feel they are in a story where they must defend their continent. Russians, for the most part, do feel they are in such a story, even if it is based on lies. This is why the British soldier's death matters politically, even beyond the tragedy for his family. It is a glimpse of what a militarized peace with Russia will look like. Western instructors and advisors present in Ukraine, weapons tests, accidents, maybe later deliberate Russian strikes on these facilities. Each incident used to frighten European publics, to split allies, to test how far Moscow can push before someone says enough. Now add one more ingredient, the new Trump presidency in Washington. Europe cannot assume anymore that the United States will automatically act as ultimate backstop against Russia. You have a White House that is openly questioning NATO, openly telling Europeans that Ukraine is not our problem, openly flirting with isolationism. This is not just about one man's personality. It reflects a deeper current in American politics that has been growing for 20 years. The idea that global leadership is too expensive and unappreciated, that allies are freeloaders, that America should turn inward. So when Michael Clark talks about a coming confrontation with Russia, at sea or in the air, during this presidency, this is what he means. A period where Moscow might try something riskier because it believes the transatlantic link is weak. That confrontation doesn't have to be tanks rushing to Berlin. It can be repeated close calls in Baltic and North Seas, collisions between ships, drones over undersea cables, near misses between fighters, cruise missiles flying just outside NATO airspace, sabotage of infrastructure. Any one of these, mishandled on a bad day, can escalate in ways nobody planned. The Kremlin is already practicing what strategists call escalation dominance. They act, we react. They launch another wave of drones. We send more air defense. They encourage cyber attacks and sabotage. We patch holes and complain. They constantly stretch our systems and our nerves. What Rutte, Clark, and some European leaders are starting to say out loud is, this pattern has to change. The West has to be able not just to absorb blows, but to set some of the agenda. That might mean, for example, more aggressive presence of European navies in the High North and the Baltic, more interference with Russia's own vulnerable logistics, more forward deployment of European forces in Eastern Europe, and maybe, eventually, parts of Western Ukraine as a screening force that frees Ukrainian units to fight at the front. Not as an invasion of Russia, not as NATO joining the war, but as a message. If you push, we push back. You are not the only one who can complicate life for the other side. Is it risky? Yes, but doing nothing is not risk-free either. It just hides the bill until later. Now let's come down from the grand strategy level to something more personal. This question of resilience. When people hear governments talk again about war preparedness, civil defense handbooks, 72-hour emergency kits, many react with disbelief or dark humor. Are we really going back to Cold War protect and survive leaflets? But modern resilience is less about nuclear bunkers and more about not panicking when systems fail. Imagine there is a major cyber attack, or sabotage, or just a vicious winter storm, and large parts of a country lose power for 48 hours. No lights, no heating, cash machines down, supermarkets quickly empty. If households have some food, water, warm clothes, power banks, maybe small gas stove or similar, they cope. They grumble, they help neighbors, they get through. If nobody has anything, and everybody assumes state will always provide, then after 12 hours you have queues, anger, social media hysteria, conspiracy theories, and politicians completely paralyzed by fear of public backlash. It becomes much easier for any hostile power to shake the society. So individual preparedness. What in Ukraine or Turkey people learn for earthquakes, for example, becomes part of national security. It is not crazy prepper stuff. It is basic responsibility in a more fragile world. This is one reason why the British soldier's death, painful as it is, should not be treated as shocking anomaly. If Europe is serious about supporting Ukraine over long haul, there will be more people in uniform working in and around that war, training, advising, testing systems, guarding embassies. Some of them will die in accidents, and some may be killed deliberately. If every such death becomes national trauma, and every Russian TV rant about it causes political panic, then deterrence will not hold very long. Finally, there is the money. Keeping Ukraine in the fight and keeping its state functioning is not cheap. European debate about using frozen Russian central bank assets, or at least the profits they generate, as collateral for long-term support is part of this bigger picture. You have over 200 billion euros sitting in European financial system blocked since 2022. If part of that can be turned into long-term funding for Ukraine, through loans guaranteed by these assets, then you are essentially making the aggressor underwrite the defense of the victim. Of course financial lawyers are nervous. Of course Belgium, where Euroclear sits, is cautious. They worry about precedent. If Europe is seen as a place where your assets can be grabbed for geopolitical reasons, then in future other countries might think twice before parking reserves in euros. So there is legal dance. We are not confiscating, we are freezing indefinitely. We are not spending Russia's money, we are using it as guarantee. This is not just word game. These distinctions matter in finance. But the strategic question underneath is simple. Do Europeans believe that helping Ukraine win, or at least not lose, is cheaper than living next door to victorious, emboldened Russia for next 30 years? If answer is yes, then using every legal tool, including those assets, becomes logical, even if it makes bankers uncomfortable. Because in the end, everything we talked about, Hule's death, Rutte's warning, Trump's America, frozen assets, civil defense, comes back to one harsh truth. Peace in Europe is no longer default setting. It is a project that has to be actively defended. Russia will absolutely exploit this British soldier's death. They will put his face on their talk shows, they will shout about English mercenaries, they will wave this case in front of their own people and any sympathetic audience abroad as proof that they are victims. We cannot stop them doing this. What we can decide is how much power that story has over us. If we allow every Kremlin narrative to shape our politics, we will drift into exactly the world Rutte is warning about. Weak, divided Europe facing aggressive neighbor with little confidence and less preparation. If instead we treat this tragedy as what it really is, an early, painful sign that the boundary between frontline and rear is blurring, then it becomes motivation to harden our societies, rebuild our defenses, and think like serious countries again. Not because we want war, but because if we are clearly able and willing to fight one, the chance that we actually have to do it becomes much smaller. History does not guarantee us peace. At best, it gives us a narrow window to get ready before the storm hits. Right now, that window is still open, but you can feel the wind changing.